Grade 8, Subject Physics, Chapter Friction, Module 1. Objectives. At the end of this module, you will be able to define friction, identify the direction of friction, comprehend the factors affecting friction, and differentiate types of friction. What is friction? When we push a box lying on the floor with a small amount of force, it does not move at all. It means that the surface of the floor on which the box is resting exerts some force on the box which acts in a direction opposite to the force of our push. In other words, some force is acting on the bottom of the stationary box which opposes its motion. This natural force between the floor and the bottom of the box is friction. That means friction is a force which always opposes the motion of one object over another object in contact with it. The force of friction acts in a direction opposite to the direction in which an object moves. What is the cause of friction? Every object has a rough surface. Though the surface may appear to be smooth to the naked eye, when we see through a microscope, it is found that the surface of all the objects have some edges. Some of the particles on the surface of the objects are in the form of tiny hills, while others form grooves. The tiny hills and grooves on the surface of objects are called irregularities of the surfaces. So, the cause of friction is the interlocking of irregularities of the two surfaces in contact. The force of friction is greater if very rough surfaces are involved. Have you heard about spring balance? What is it? Yes, a spring balance is a device which is used for measuring force acting on an object. The spring balance contains a coiled spring which gets stretched when a force is applied to its free end. We can use a spring balance to measure the amount of frictional force acting on an object. Factors affecting friction. It has been found by experiments that the friction between the two surfaces depends on two factors. The first one, the nature of the surfaces in contact. That means friction depends on the smoothness or roughness of the two surfaces which are in contact with each other. When two surfaces in contact are smooth, then the friction between them will be small. As the degree of roughness of the two surfaces in contact increases, the friction also increases. The second factor is the force with which two forces are pressed together. Greater the weight of an object which moves over another surface, greater will be the friction between them. That means when weight of one object over the other increases, the pressing force also increases. If the two surfaces of objects are pressed together harder by a greater force, then the friction will increase. Friction is of three types, which are static friction, sliding friction, and rolling friction. Static friction. The maximum frictional force present between any two objects when one object just tends to move or slip over the surface of the other object is called friction. It is also called starting friction because an object just tends to start moving and it does not actually move. Static friction is opposing or resisting force between two solid surfaces. Now, sliding friction. The frictional force present when one object moves slowly over the surface of another object is known as sliding friction. Since sliding friction is smaller than the static friction, it is easier to keep an object moving which is already in motion than to move the same object from rest. Why sliding friction is smaller than static friction? When an object has already started moving, the irregularities on its surface do not get enough time to interlock to the irregularities on the surface of the other object completely. Since the interlocking of the two surfaces is less when an object has already started moving, therefore, sliding friction is smaller than the static friction. Rolling friction. When an object, like a wheel, rolls over the surface of another object, the resistance to its motion is called rolling friction. Rolling friction is much less than sliding friction. Thus, rolling reduces friction. Rolling friction is much smaller than sliding friction and static friction. Since rolling friction is much less than the other frictions, it is very easy and convenient to pull heavy luggages fitted with rollers. Heavy machines can be easily moved from one place to another by placing round logs of wood under them and then pushing with the force of hands. The round logs of wood act as rollers and make it easier to move the heavy machine kept on them. In this module, you have learned friction is a force which opposes the motion of one object over the other. The factors affecting friction are the pressing force and the nature of surfaces. The cause of friction is the interlocking of irregularities of the two surfaces. Friction is of three types: static friction, sliding friction, and rolling friction.